Okay, so today we're going deep on something you don't hear a lot about,
Yeah.
phase 4 clinical trials.
Right.
So we all know about, you hear about drugs going through trials,
Right.
but that's usually before they're approved, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So what happens after? It's
Well,
like, are we done?
that's the thing, right? People think that once a drug is approved,
Right.
that's the end of it. It's
Yeah.
safe and effective and we're done.
Yeah.
But that's not really how it works.
Right.
That's where phase 4 comes in.
So that's what this whole deep dive is about today.
Exactly.
We've got a really great overview of phase 4 trials. And it's something that I think a lot of people don't realize even exists.
Right.
And it could actually have like a direct impact on your life,
Oh, absolutely.
without a doubt.
So one of the things that I thought was really interesting and kind of scary, actually,
Yeah.
was that there was a drug, Vioxx. It was for arthritis.
And it was actually pulled off the market after a phase 4 trial
Yeah, that was a big one.
because they found that there was a serious risk of heart attacks.
Right. And it shows you, it really highlights why this continued research is so important.
Yeah.
Just because a drug gets approved doesn't mean we know everything about it.
Right. Yeah. So let's break it down a little bit.
Yeah, for sure.
So what exactly are these phase 4 trials?
So basically, think of them like the long game in medical research.
Okay.
They're also sometimes called post-marketing surveillance studies.
Okay.
And really what they're all about is keeping an eye on these medications after they're already out there.
Right. So after they're approved.
Exactly. Gathering more information, especially about the long-term effects.
Okay.
Because remember, the earlier trials, they're important, of course.
Right.
But they involve a much smaller group of people.
Makes sense.
So we're talking a much larger, more diverse group now.
And this is where we could start to see like those rare side effects that maybe didn't pop up in those smaller trials.
Exactly. It's like the difference between testing a car in a controlled environment, on a test track,
Right.
and then actually seeing how it performs out on the roads in real traffic with real drivers.
Right. With thousands of drivers.
Thousands of drivers, different weather conditions, you name it.
Yeah.
That's what phase 4 is all about, seeing how it works in the real world.
Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So are all phase 4 trials the same, or are there like different types?
Right. So they're not all the same. The source material we have here talks about 3 main types.
Okay.
You've got post-authorization safety studies, PAS,
Pass.
authorization efficacy studies, PAES,
Okay.
and then pragmatic trials.
A lot of acronyms.
A lot of acronyms, yeah.
But that's helpful to kind of break it down like
Yeah.
that. So tell me about what are the key differences between those 3?
Sure. So PAS trials, those are laser focused on safety, like a detective trying to find any hidden dangers or risks that might have been missed in those earlier trials.
Oh, wow. And are these always voluntary, or are they sometimes like mandated?
Yeah. So that's an important point. Sometimes they're actually required by regulatory agencies,
Wow.
like, the FDA here in the US. They want to be extra sure a drug is truly safe for widespread use.
Okay. That makes sense. So what about PAEs?
Right. So PAEs, they're more about efficacy, so how well the treatment actually works over time.
Uh-huh.
So they help confirm if a drug is effective in the long run and how it works for different groups of people.
Oh, okay. So like this is where we might learn that a drug works better for, say, women than men,
Exactly.
or older patients versus younger patients.
Exactly. Or people with certain underlying conditions.
What
So it's
that-
really getting into the nuances of how this drug works for different people.
That's super valuable information.
Oh, it's crucial both for doctors making treatment decisions and for patients, obviously.
Yeah, of course. Okay, and then the last one was pragmatic trials, right? What are those all about?
Right. So pragmatic trials, these are really interesting. They study the drug in real-world situations.
Okay.
They take into account all the complexities of everyday life that you just don't get in a controlled research setting.
So not just in a lab.
Right, not just in a lab, out there in the world with all the messy realities of people's lives, their jobs, their other medications they might be taking, their diets, everything.
Right. So much more going on.
Exactly. And that's important because, what works in theory doesn't always work the same way in practice.
Yeah, for sure.
So pragmatic trials, they help bridge that gap.
So they're giving us a lot more real-world data.
Real-world data, real-world insights. And that can be incredibly helpful for doctors who are making those tough decisions about treatment.
Right, right. Okay, so it sounds like these phase 4 trials, they're doing a lot of good. They're providing a lot of important information. But are there any downsides? Are there any challenges that come with these trials?
Yeah. So, like with any research involving humans, you have to consider the ethical aspects very carefully.
Right.
These are real people we're talking about, not just data points.
Of course, yeah.
So, making sure these trials are conducted ethically, protecting the well-being and the rights of the participants, that's absolutely paramount.
Okay, that makes sense. And then is there anything else? Are there any other challenges that come up?
Yeah, so another big challenge is maintaining data quality.
Okay.
Because remember, these phase 4 trials, they're happening out in the real world. It's
Right.
not a controlled lab setting. So it can be harder to control for all the different variables that could affect the results.
Oh, right,
Right.
because, yeah, people are living their lives.
Exactly. They're not following a strict protocol like they might in an earlier trial.
Right. So how do you make sure that the data is good?
That's the million-dollar question, right? And that's something researchers are constantly working on, developing better methods for collecting data, for analyzing it, for making sure it's as reliable as possible. Because at the end of the day, if the data is flawed, the results of the trial just aren't going to be reliable.
Right. It undermines the whole thing.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's kind of recap what we've learned here. These phase 4 trials, they're a critical but often overlooked part of the whole drug development process.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
They can uncover hidden risks like we saw with Vioxx.
Right.
They can confirm long-term benefits and guide treatment decisions in a much more personalized way.
Absolutely. And I think the key takeaway here is that medical knowledge is constantly evolving. What we know about a drug today, it could change tomorrow.
Right, because of these trials.
Because of these trials, exactly.
So on that note, here's something I want you to think about as we finish up this deep dive.
Okay.
Think about the medications that you take regularly or that your family members take.
Yeah.
Are any of them being studied in a phase 4 trial right now?
Good question to ask.
And how does knowing that these trials are happening, how does that shape your view of those medications?
It definitely gives you a different perspective, makes you realize that the research doesn't stop just because a drug is on the market.
Right.
It's an ongoing process.
It's ongoing. So that's something to think about.
Definitely.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.
See you then.